Hey guys, my name is Isaac Lukentik and welcome back to the 5th episode of The Adventure Pod, brought to you by School of Media and Communications of Taylor's University. And today we'll be talking about advertising hacks, self-regulation without killing creativity. And we have the perfect guest for this episode. He is the president of Malaysian Advertisers Association and also Vice Chairman of Content Forum Malaysia. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Claudian Navin Stanislaus. How are you feeling today, Navin?
I'm good.
Right. And have you eaten breakfast yet?
Well, I generally go on a staple of a couple of coffees before I start anything.
So no growling, huh?
Yeah, no growling.
No growling.
Yeah.
All right, Ken. Right, so let's just dive right into the question today.
Okay.
So, being where you are right now, could you share with us some of your experiences in this journey of yours?
Okay. Well, it depends on which journey we're talking about. If we're talking about advertising, then it was a little accident or trip over into the industry. I came from IT background, did law, was in I was in trading in terms of commodities and stuff like it. And I kind of went into it because I was doing freelance copywriting at the time. In the early 90s, Bahasa Malaysia copywriters on a freelance basis earned quite a bit. So I was doing that on the side, and I got into it because the market was going south, and I just decided I wanted to follow my hobby into writing and became a copywriter. Now, in terms of where I sit with MAA, I joined Babas back in 2003, and being an SME Malaysian brand, I was invited by the MAA to become a member. Somehow or other, I've been there for 17 years in the MAA on the council. And I think probably one of the reasons I was there for that long was they actually launched the content code in 2004. And the code was sent to all the members to read. I assumed that was an instruction, so I actually read it cover to cover. Apparently, I was the only one, which is why I ended up in the Content Forum and also with ASA, the other side of the regulatory equation.
Could you share with us what the code is about? Just a brief explanation of it.
Okay. Just to give you an idea, advertising in Malaysia has always had some sort of regulation on it. It was initially by the ASA, Advertising Standards of Malaysia. This was, I think, set up in the early 70s by the late Tengku Harun Rahman. And one of the criteria, or what the basis was, it was based on ASA UK. It was an advertising standards code. It was a guidelines, best practices that follows the laws of the land. Now, the Communication and Multimedia Act came about, and it kind of split advertising into two parts. So all regular advertising and content that was electronic or broadcast went under the content code, whereas everything else in advertising got split and remained with ASA. So in-store advertising, billboards, labeling, and basically everything else in newspapers and all that was under ASA and still is, whereas everything in terms of broadcast, electronic, transmitted content, that's under Content Forum. Okay, essence, the code is the same. It's just that more skewed to the particular media.
Got it. And as you explained about your journey, right, different careers in your life, did you ever feel, have you ever felt lost?
Not so much loss, as in, I chose career paths that I wanted to go into. But there was always this nagging thing about the advertising industry, right? Especially the age when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s. Getting into advertising was a taboo for most Asian families. It was a doctor, lawyer, engineer. Advertising wasn't part of the equation. Neither was IT, which I got into. But I only got into because I watched the series War Games. And I thought IT was all about hacking. Clearly it wasn't. So after doing that, I said, nah, I don't want to sit down at a desk job at the back. I want to meet people. I want to be upfront. So I went back to the general thing that most of the family did, which was law, and I did want medicine. But after doing that, I realized I didn't want to practice law either. So it was pretty much a journey. And then I went into trading and things like just to get the idea of business and everything else. But writing was always a passion. In fact, you're having a speaker here speak who's actually a writer. So, I probably speak like I write more than a normal speaker would. Uh, Now, in terms of the career path and how I chose it, it was probably at the back there was an incident that happened that caused that entire thing. So um, I think I was about 18. I was in college, and a friend of ours told a few of us that it's a Friday night. There's free booze. It
Uh-huh.
was at a industry award show. This was before the Kanchils. Is a precursor to Kanchils actually. So we were all gate crashed. We were enjoying our booze. We met. I met this guy, and until that point, I didn't know copywriter was spelled WRITER.
Mm.
I always thought it was copywriter as RIGHTER because I didn't have a clue what it was. Now he was apparently an award-winning guy because I saw the statue that he won that night, and he told us about the industry and everything else. And I think that kind of triggered the first spark of interest in the industry.
Mm.
Although I had a lot of friends who got in, it was a taboo scenario, so I couldn't even mention it to the parents. So I think it kind of went back in a full circle when I got back in.
Got it. And on a side note, how many booths did you have during that time?
Do you ever remember?
Oh, well, yeah, that's true. That's true, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing a bit about the experiences that you had in this journey of yours, right? And let's talk about self-regulation, right? Could you explain the concept of self-regulation in the advertising industry and why it is important in the Malaysian context?
Okay. Let's not talk about self-regulation.
Oh, all right.
Okay. You guys, are you local?
Yeah, I'm local.
Okay. So the guys who are not local, for example, now you come over to uni. Uh, Probably you get a place to stay the first year or whatever, and then after that you start looking for a place. You find a couple of friends. You go and stay in this apartment. Now, what's the first thing you do? Do you set ground rules?
Oh, no, start cleaning up the house or
Well,
something
yeah,
like that.
but what about rules about how you operate in the house? Like, say, for example, if somebody is busy or using the sofa, uh, something is left on the door outside, just in case, right?
Yeah.
So these are ground rules that you normally set. If you didn't have these kind of rules, then somebody might take advantage of the scenario. So that is basically what self-regulation is. It's just guidelines, it's rules to make sure that advertisers stay legit or stay true to, say, true to the path, basically. So they practice ethics. Now, the reason why that is necessary is advertising is a powerful tool, right? So it's content. It's been used in the past, and I've got a wall of bad ads. Considering I was in advertising regulation, I've got this wall of bad ads that were done. Even some promoting Guinness Stout for breastfeeding baby mothers. Yeah, those were the ads that we had in the past, right? I don't know how true that is. It probably came up with a whole bunch of future alcoholics. But there was a need for some lines and some, I would say, ethics to be brought in and best practices to be brought into advertising. And that's the reason why advertising regulations came about. Now, the idea of self-regulation, the reason why self-regulation is better is because we enforce it ourselves as opposed to government regulations. Now, government regulations are necessary, but they tend to be rigid. They tend to take a long time to pass and to take effect. And by that time, we work in lightning speed, right? By the time you pass a regulation or try to enforce one, the campaign's done and dusted. So self-regulation comes in a different part. Before you put that ad out there, you have to quantify or qualify whatever you're putting out. Okay. Now, the two codes that we have, the content code and the ASA code, the MCAP, Malaysian Code of Advertising Practices, both of them have multiple codes, multiple guidelines, each on specific areas, right? So if you go on the premise of let's have really decent content, right? You have legal, honest, respectful, decent, and culturally sensitive. Now, this is the preamble for the entire codes that we have in Malaysia, if you base it, any of the content you're creating, whether it's print, written, even audio, and you base it on this premise alone, you would clear all the codes. Okay, but of course, because of the specific conditions and the needs of the particular medium or media, there will be more defined codes that are written in because of areas that were gray and needed clarification because of a case that came up. Okay, so the code, although it's written in there, it is a living code. It will keep on adapting, it will keep on evolving, whether it is through guidelines, best practices that go out, or brought in as amendments to the code.
Right. Okay. So that's a lot of information to take in, but I
Correct.
believe that the acronyms, right, that's easier, much easier to remember. But you mentioned about the commercial, right? How do you say the ad, the Guinness Stout one? What is one of the let's try not to call out any names, but what is one of the weirdest or not in bad taste commercials that you have seen?
Okay, taste is a subjective thing, right? I mean, in
Yes.
some cultures, there's no word for gross, for example, right? But I think in terms of any content, it has to be sensitive to the environment and the nature of the society, and even that changes within time, right? So what content runs now and what we think is normal, half the stuff that we see on TikTok, if you ran it through your grandparents or your great grandparents, okay, they would probably throw some holy water on you or try to wash you in soap or whatever
Right,
it is,
yeah.
right? But it's the current norm. So the current norm will always change. But I think one of the things that, especially in this culture where we have a mixed culture scenario and multiple religions and everything else, sensitivity sometimes are not looked in at the other person's perspective, because you may be an Indian or a Chinese or a Malay and you're creating content for another race. Now, for you to understand every nuance of their sensitivities may be difficult unless you grew up in an environment that you knew all these cultures and you were deeply into it. Now, not all of us are fully exposed in that because we tend to grow up in groups or whatever it is. Some of us are, so you'll see a disparity between understanding the other race or other religion or whatever it is, and these become sensitive issues. Now, say for example, I mean, there was a ad some years back about this retail company who did an ad about a whitening product. Now they literally painted a lady black. Yeah, so that's common sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but clearly they didn't see it. Okay, so they were talking about. They went on the old Malay movie legend of Hitam Manis, which is not a negative thing, but when it was portrayed with someone painted black and then using the skin wash, and all of a sudden she's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are the kind of things that we're talking about. Now that would definitely not have passed the code. In fact, it got penalized for being in bad taste. The other areas that we'll go into is, for example, making claims. Now, the biggest part is false claims, right? So the law is very clear. The regulations are very clear. If you're going to make a claim, you have to substantiate every claim. So any claim that you see anywhere, whether it's on TV, whether it's on a billboard or whatever, you better look for an asterisk. Okay, so if you say number one or the greatest or the best or the most reach or the longest, furthest, whatever you want to claim, there should be an asterisk followed by another asterisk below and where that claim was found. Okay, so whether that claim was through a market research study or whatever it is, it must be a factual research. And the evidence must be ready at hand. It should be called and asked for quantifying. Right? So that is basically how it's supposed to be. Unfortunately, if you look around, these claims sometimes are not quantified. And in fact, a lot of the times, when you see things like out-of-home media and things like that, where billboards and things where people make claims and they are false claims. Now, the danger of false claims is this: they mislead. Now, they give a false impression to the consumer. And end of the day, we serve to protect the consumer. Right? So without this kind of protection, the consumer might make bad decisions or make rash decisions, assuming that something is true. So, say for example, if your ad shows a kid hanging out the window of something, or a moving vehicle, for example, now is that good? Because some kid might see it and say, "Hey, it's okay to hang out of the vehicle,"
Right.
right? So these are the reasons why you do it. The other thing is, say for example, somebody makes a claim: if you drink this, you'll be thin in 2 minutes. You know never it's not going to happen, but somebody might believe it's true. Okay, now that's a blatant lie, unless you can prove it can happen. So you need to have proof for that. If not, somebody may pay good money for this. Now, of course, that is the normal scenario. Now you also have claims of misleading and fake news that comes into play. Okay, so that's covered by the content code as well, because we are a generation today of title readers and visual acceptors, but we don't read the content below. And that's why half the WhatsApp messages, the title and the content below is totally different, and that's how fake news goes about. So these are the kind of things we try to limit, I would say.
And from what you have just shared, right, do you feel like media literacy plays a part?
Media literacy, I think part of the reason for this is because over media literacy is come scenario because we absorb media from every different platform there is, right? Our devices are media now, clearly.
Yeah.
And content comes in for every different angle possible now. So if that is the case, then we can't moderate every single thing. We can't moderate the speech that you're sending to your friend, and that's being sent within circles. Okay, but if you moderate it, then we have some chance. Okay, so before putting out a message, if you decide to take a step back and read that content before sharing it, then we have a chance. If you don't, then that's very likely we have no chance.
Right, got it. And thank you so much for so much of the information, even good examples. Like I remembered about the skin whiten from the blackface, if I'm not mistaken, into with water, is it?
Oh, well, it was I think it was a soap or a cleanser. I think.
Cleanser. All right. Wow. Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah,
that
sounds more like bleach, but
yeah, right. Okay, I'm gonna throw you off right now, Mr. Navin. Right, but do you think that balance is key?
Yeah, of course.
Balance is key.
Balance is of course key. I think the idea behind the guidelines, they're just guide rails, right? There's nothing wrong in playing within the rules and being creative.
Right.
There are no limits within the rules. It's just the rules are there to prevent or protect the consumer. That's basically it. And, it also works for the brands because, the moment you are found to be foul of this and you lose trust of the consumer, if you lose trust of the consumer, building that back, it's going to take a lot more budget than you spend for that ad itself.
Right. Yeah. So, as like I mentioned about balance, right? So, it's about self-regulating because I was gonna ask how you would advise advertisers on balancing creative freedom with the need to adhere to self-regulation guidelines, right? And how do advertisers do that? How can they do that?
Okay, I'm an ad guy in essence who went into branding, right? So I went to the corporate side of the equation, but I'm a copywriter and I've always been a creative at heart. I'm here in a batik shirt with jeans. I've got my E's outside. So, you can conform without conforming. Okay. There's no reason you need to be by the book and follow everything in a rigid way. But within that context of the guidelines, you can still work a lot of magic because I think it takes a lot more creativity and ingenuity to work within rules as opposed to having a blank slate where you can do whatever you like. So I think in the 80s, I remember a cousin of mine came back with some ads from Germany selling cars. Most of those ads, the reason why they brought it back was there were women walking around without clothes.
Okay.
So I don't know what they were selling.
Right.
But clearly the car has got visibility to some extent. But that was a way of doing it. I think in Brazil, it carried on going till the 90s, I think. So these are the kind of no limit kind of scenarios. But was that really creative? Yeah, you got people to watch. You got probably people to record the ad. Okay. But did your message get across?
Mm. And maybe they
And
would
what
have
was the message you're trying to get
right.
across?
Maybe they would actually focusing on the topless woman, right?
Correct.
Right. Okay. So it's similar to the idea of it's better to work on something with a budget rather than without the budget.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
Yeah. Having worked on the client side, the agency side of the equation as well as the client side, working without a budget is hard. You come up with fantastic ideas, and then when you see them presented to the client always has a budget, right? And then they'll say, okay, do that for $9.95 and throw the kitchen sink in as well, right? So that's always going to be impossible. So you'll end up shortchanging yourself, the creative idea, the execution, the client, and everything else. And, you get a mishmash of almost rubbish, right? But if you work with a budget, then you know what the limitations are. Even if the client decides to drop the budget a bit, you know where you can skew it down. And you can also put in, creatively say, okay, listen, these were add-ons. Okay, so it's adding on to the budget rather than dropping this out. So if this is coming in, then this is going out. And, it's more modular in that sense. But you're in more control as opposed to an open scenario and, do whatever you like. And in reality, nobody ever gives you total freedom to do whatever you like.
That's true.
Because everyone's accountable at some point.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's hop into the next question. We face dilemmas in our lives, right? So could you share with us some of the common ethical dilemmas that Malaysian advertisers face, and how can self-regulation actually address these dilemmas?
Okay. I think the question of for advertisers is always been a scenario of competition, right? So how far can we go in terms of competing with someone? What kind of challenges are there? What are the limits of what we can do? Now, direct competition is not permissible in the sense of putting somebody down, but you can always talk about yourself. There's nothing wrong about it. Just don't put somebody else down. Okay. Whatever the claims are, make sure they're justified. I think the biggest challenge right now is there's lack of knowledge or awareness for the codes in existence. And even among the industry players, honestly, because the industry is so, it moves in such a rapid cycle, right? And you got players from all over the world playing their game in every country in the world, right? You got Malaysians, you got foreigners here, you got Malaysians overseas and everything else. So understanding the laws on land, the laws apply across board. In every jurisdiction, you have their own codes and conducts and everything else. So for you to know that this is there, so the first thing you do is you go look for it and you understand the laws of the land before you start applying it. Unfortunately, when you don't know there are such things as laws of the land and regulations in place, what tends to happen is people tend to go on this whole thing of, okay, creative freedom and doing it that way, not realizing that there are some stipulations. Now, what happens with that is you run this whole campaign, you run the ad, everything goes up, and then you get a letter from one of us, either ASA or Content Code, saying, listen, your press ad breached the code, or this poster or billboard made a claim. Can you justify this whole thing? And then you justify. What do you mean justify? I just think I'm number one, and everyone said I'm number one. So how do I justify this? Okay, so awareness of it is not there. So that is the reason why, as an industry, there are multiple stakeholders in it, and all of us go out there to try and educate on these guidelines and getting knowledge on these guidelines out there.
Okay, got it. That's very interesting to understand, the ethical dilemmas coming, like, when you're actually publicizing ads, not knowing the laws, and then when you get the letter, you're like, oh no, like, yeah, like in deep trouble, right? Okay, and as the president of Malaysian Advertisers Association, right, what are the initiatives that have been implemented in order to promote ethical advertising practices?
Okay, so the MEA was always on the table when these codes were drafted. So when ASA codes were drafted initially, the Malaysian Advertising Association was there, and it's still a stakeholder. when the content forum and the content code is drafted, we are involved as well. So we are there at the point of writing these codes. So we look at it from two perspectives. We wear two hats. One, as industry players, to make sure that the laws and guidelines are not so frigid and rigid that we can't work, right? We have to create a conducive environment where marketers can do marketing, where there is certain stretches of the truth which we need for marketing. At the same time, we have to look at the consumer side of the equation. So as consumers, we need to look at it in the most simplified possible terms. There, we don't need to call a lawyer in to look at these codes. Any consumer will see and know that my rights have been breached or whatever it is. And that is why we craft the codes in such a way that it's more consumer friendly and consumer protecting, while creating the space for the ecosystem to work and function.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so that is in terms of setting up the codes. Now, in terms of educating, now what we've done is we reach out to all our members. We provide education on the codes. We provide workshops in relations with ASA and Content Forum as well. Now, aside from that, now what we've done in the last year is we've opened up a new category of membership for affiliate members, where we allow associations and other trade associations to be part of us, especially the SMEs, because the SMEs are 40% of our national GDP, right? And these are the future brands. So the future brands may not be advertising now, to be very small scales of advertising, but eventually they will be advertising. And when they do, these laws will apply to them. So we educate them now. Another area that we have opened up is the IHL, and Taylor is a member. It's the Institute of Higher Learning, especially the mass comm and marketing programs. So the idea was to form a kind of bridge between the industry and the students who are future marketers, to get them educated on the fact that there are regulations and codes and everything else. And we're looking at maybe setting up some sort of micro credential programs where they come ready with the knowledge of regulation. So when they're going out to work, employers will feel easier, and the fact that these guys are already equipped with the law, I don't need to educate them because half my staff don't know anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
And being that are most of your staff coming from an advertising degree, right? Them not knowing, is that like a, how to say, does that tell you anything about the education right now?
Well, there's always going to be a disparity between what's being taught in theory and what is practical. Because, I mean, you can't change textbooks that fast, as fast as the industry moves, right? So what is happening right now, next month or next year, will be out of the ecosystem. And normally when it's out of the ecosystem is when somebody writes a book about it and everyone buys books about it, because they can't use it anymore. That's why they sold the idea in a book. Okay. Now, by the time it comes to textbooks have to be very safe, right? It has to go on what is generally workable. And then from there you expand. So if you're coming out with theoretical knowledge from uni or any master's program or PhD program or whatever it is, and then expecting 100% that to be applied in practicality, you will be surprised, because a lot of that has already passed, right? But you need a basis. If you don't have that basis, then you will go nowhere. So what we are trying to do is we're trying to bridge that gap, so that you have the theoretical as well as some parts of the practical, because otherwise that bill is going to come to us, right? The 6 months that you come in industrial training with us, or that 6 months you come in as an intern with us, will be spent learning the job, which you should be already applying. And in that 6 months, the industry would have changed as well. So you would have learned something that would have been past anyway. So that is the reason why I think we need both sides of the equation: the theory to strengthen you guys and get you ready out there, and then the practical application, so that you're equipped to start rolling immediately when you land.
Yeah. So it's the idea of, no matter like how much education we've got, it's all about experiences, because we are always on this ever learning process, ever learning process, if I'm not mistaken, right? Okay, right. I really appreciate that. And I'm learning more about it time by time, right? And could you share with us, like, grab something from the back of your memory, any success stories or case studies where self-regulation actually significantly impacted the advertising landscape in Malaysia?
Okay, I know you guys shared that question with me as well, and I kind of smirked on that one because the actual fact is the success of self-regulation and advertising regulations is when there is no case,
Ah,
right?
okay.
The ultimate utopic scenario would be we don't need these codes and don't need these regulations because it'll be a perfect scenario because everyone will be doing the right thing and you don't need this. So the less number of cases get pointed out, the less number of breaches that happen, actually has a better value than having a scenario where there was a case and it got changed. Because if there was a case, somebody breached it, right? If somebody breached the code, then we applied the code to change it. Now that's something that we do on a daily basis. So every case that we go through that comes to a conclusion is a success story. There's no ratio of success. But the very fact that there was a case means that time self-regulation didn't work because either they were not aware of it or they intentionally breached the code. That means self-regulation didn't work. But every other time when an ad was brought forward or say a design was proposed and everything else and the client said, listen, I can't do that, okay, because it's just wrong and it's a breach, that means self-regulation worked. Every time a creative said, listen, I know, Mr. Client, you want this, but I can't do that because that's a breach of code and it's against ethics, then it worked. Every time a newspaper said, listen, I can't run this ad because it's false, you don't have proof, then it worked.
Wow, that feels like a mind-blowing moment, the way you put it, right? Okay, so let's move on to the next question, right, Navin? With the rise of digital advertising, all of us are on our phones, and I feel that I'm pretty addicted to it. Are you addicted to it, Mr.?
Well, I've got 4 devices at any one time, so
Okay, so both of us.
It's part of your.
It's part of the work, right? Yeah. So with the rise of digital advertising, right, what are some of the unique challenges do self-regulation face, and how is the industry adapting?
Okay, so I think any form of media, it's always the same, right? It's just how it's being applied. Now, when radio ads started, people were using radio because they had a captive audience. They were making false claims and doing whatever needed to be done, and then you curtailed that. Now, you went into TV, same scenario. I mean, if you remember radio ads, I think it was 1940s, the Mars invasion, right? Orson Welles did one radio show, and there was a nationwide panic. Everyone thought Earth was being invaded by Mars. That's the power of how radio was. That was content. Now, that same thing applied into TV and went to digital. Now, in the digital space, the difference is jurisdiction is tied to the servers. Okay? So if your servers are located in Cyberjaya or anywhere in Malaysia, our regulations have jurisdiction. If the servers are foreign, so things like social media, where all their servers are foreign located, we technically have no jurisdiction.
Okay.
But thankfully, the operators, the organizations work in collaboration with the Content Forum, and they do assist us to take remedial action whenever certain claims are made or whatever it is. But, social media and everything else, it's so big and so large a scale that even they can't cope with it. Right? The likes of Meta and everything else, they have content that's coming out there, and their reaction time to this content takes a long time. Perhaps with greater penetration of AI into the entire mix, this would come in better. But again, the companies themselves have their own personal or their corporate priorities, in terms of freedom of speech and things like that, for example. So there's always that balancing act to worry about. Okay. But again, like I said, if all this falls back to the essence of the consumer, and the consumer gives a pushback and say, listen, this content is just not appropriate and I don't want to watch this. And you do that. And, our Malaysian Membawang army is really powerful in that sense. If they could actually get their act together and say, listen, this kind of content breaches the code and, I don't want to see it, trust me, this content will never come out. Okay, so if the consumers decide what is right and what is wrong, and they understand what is right and what is wrong, and why it is right and why it is wrong, and who we're trying to protect, which is them, in fact, then all this pushes from that way up rather than top down.
Okay, got it. And I believe that from our discussion just now, you did talk about how you guys were making an effort in educating and training the advertisers about self-regulations, right? And what are the three again? There is recently you guys have been.
Well, we do workshops, we do talks, we do panel discussions, town halls and stuff like that. All whether it's industry-led or whether it's with the regulators as well, we do it with both in terms of the industry. We do trainings in-house as well under Content Forum.
Okay. And I think you did bring up the concept of trust, right? So how does maintaining ethical standards actually in advertising contribute in building and maintaining consumer trust? After all, trust is very important, right?
Yeah. Okay. Have you had a scenario with a friend who told you a lie that you never found out until much later?
Yeah, that hurts deep inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's your relationship with that friend since? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So with a consumer and brands, it is a relationship. I mean, anyone can tell you a brand is what a brand creates. A brand is not what a brand creates. A brand is a perception that a consumer creates of this logo or entity that you have or product that you have. Okay, so that perception is driven by their experiences. So if their experiences are lies,
That just breaks the trust.
So no matter what your logo says, no matter how rapidly or how frequently you throw your logo up there, all that's going to do is recall that experience with that brand, which was a lie. Okay, so if I say IKEA, right? The first thing that comes to mind may be that yellow recycle bag.
Yeah.
It may be meatballs.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay. It could also be festive jam-packed, waiting to buy this one bunch of candles that your mother sent you to buy, and there are 300 people in front of you. Now, what do? There's nice ice cream on the other end, but you can't get to it because of that. So your experience with IKEA could be any one of these things, right? So likewise, with brands, if trust is a scenario and trust is broken, to repair that and fix that takes a lot more than you would have done investing in that first project that actually lied in the first place. So why lie?
Wow. That really sounds like a romantic relationship,
It is.
Well, not that I have any experiences of it, but
Every brand relationship is a date.
Right.
Okay. And the idea is to get to third base.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Right.
So if you perpetually start in first base and you get thrown out because you lied, because you were seeing somebody else,
then your fault lah.
Yeah.
Okay. So think of advertising as like a romantic relationship.
Correct.
Right. Okay. And the final question is, so we're looking into the future, right? What do you see as the future of self-regulation in the Malaysian advertising industry?
Okay. So I walked into self-regulation in 2004 or 2006 rather. And one thing that baffled me was, I thought all the regulations were under ASA, right? So I sat in ASA first. And, people were complaining about TV ads. And then I looked at it and it's like, oh, okay, that's not covered here. Okay, so then they said, since you're asking so many questions, why did you go in Content Forum as well? So I was doing Content Forum and ASA. I still do that, right? Now, sitting in Content Forum and ASA, now I realize the confusion. The confusion is, okay, so now there's a complaint. Who do I send it to? Now, I'm a consumer, right? I see this ad that appeared in the newspaper. Do I send it to ASA or do I send it to Content Forum?
Oh.
Now, if I send it to Content Forum, then the complaint is not accepted because it's under ASA's jurisdiction. Now, so the disparity between the two laws or guidelines caused this. Now, Spanner came in and screwed that up even further because now you have an e-newspaper and you got a print newspaper. One is governed by ASA, the other is governed by Content Forum.
Oh.
So now you have certain laws that are permissible under Content Forum that are not permissible in ASA. So you have an ad, for example, that permitted one side and not permitted the other side.
Ah, that blurs the lines, right?
Correct. Okay. So this was caused because there was a split in the two codes, and it was crafted separately. Because the CMA, the Communications and Multimedia Act, basically only looked at multimedia as an overall media scenario and had take everything out of advertising that was content related and it was electronic related out of the ASA code. Now, because of that, now you have two codes. You have two codes, you have multiple authorities looking at these multiple codes. So there are about 40 different regulations and laws that any single advertiser and marketer needs to look at any one time. So one of the fights that we've been trying to do, and one of my personal agendas is to try and get, we tried many different things. We tried to get a one panel scenario with, get rid of everything, merge it all into one. Very hard because you have a lot of different jurisdictions, a lot of different stakeholders who will be losing power and things like that. So we given up on that. Right. The next move was to try and get a unified code. Okay, so at least have one book. Every one of us have your own regulatory or panels and authorities or whatever, but at least a common code, a unified common code of advertising per se that everyone just knows. You know it cover to cover, and that's it. You don't have to worry. Whatever media, whatever platform, it's all covered. That's what we need. That's what we don't have. And I think the content code actually permits something like this because everything is actually covered within. It is just that the CMA has Communications and Multimedia Act, right? The word multimedia is joined together, so it means multimedia, a media that has everything inside. But if they put a space in between, it's multimedia, which means everything. It's as simple as that.
Just a space right in the middle.
A space in between, which means everything can go back under the content code.
Right.
So the future would be ultimately to have one unified code that advertisers can use, marketers can use. So there's no confusion for marketers. There's also no confusion from consumers because the consumers don't know what to do right now and who to complain to. Of course, the ultimate would be a utopian scenario where, you don't need codes because you just do the right thing.
Right.
Yeah, that's never going to happen.
Yeah. That's just a bit delulu, as the Gen Z say. Right. So these are all the questions that I have, but I have one more question for you, Navin. Towards the viewers, what is, one advice that you would give, or maybe a quote that, they could resonate with?
Okay. As a content creator, and today every one of us are content creators, right? You don't have to be in those days. You were brand ambassadors, you were celebrities. That's the only time when you're content creators. Now, literally everything is a content. Everyone's a content creator, including the neighbor's cat, right? So as a content creator, if you take it upon yourself to create content that not just attracts attention and gets you eyeballs and earns you some followings and everything else, but put out content that you be proud of. Number one, right? Number two, put out content that you wouldn't mind seeing yourself from somebody else. Because if you think somebody is putting false content out, then don't put your own false content out. Okay, it's like everything we do, right? If you claim somebody is doing it, make sure you're not doing it yourself. Don't tell your brother he has a splinter in his eye when you have a log in yours.
Oh, that hurts. Yeah, got it. Wow. I feel like the viewers would definitely take so much information from this, and because as you mentioned, we are all content creators. We could just maybe post something and boom, fame.
Well, we also know the reality that with so much content out there, and absorption rates are very low, which is why people like us go out there and keep on saying the same thing we say, hopefully. So I believe on one thing. The one thing is impacting your circle of influence. Okay. So if I talk to 5 people and the 5 people in the room or 6 people in the room, if they talk to 6 people in the room and they speak to this next 6 people in the room, at least the information disseminates. So the more we push this message out, the more we push any agenda out, the better it has a chance of working. It's the ripple effect of throwing a Double in the
Yeah,
water.
water, right. Okay. Thank you so much, Navin, for sharing so many gems for the viewers to take home with. And I really appreciate you for being on the Adventure Podcast. Right. And to the viewers, thank you so much for checking out the Adventure Pod. And remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment right below. And check us out on the next episode of the Adventure Pod. Isaac here, signing out.